Hello, my name is David Justice, and welcome to COR 302 Online. This is my third time teaching COR 302 for Greenville, first time online, so hopefully you all enjoy the course. I know I'm excited about it. I'm a Greenville alum. I graduated from Greenville in 2012. More recently, I got a master's in philosophy from UMSL, and in the fall I will be beginning a master's in theology at SLU. This is a topic that I find really interesting, philosophically, theologically, and sort of how that all weaves into our faith as Christians. And in general, there are two main points that I want to make in this course. First, that modern science and Christianity are compatible. That doesn't mean that you need to accept the things that modern science is telling us. You certainly don't need to accept an old earth or evolution or those sorts of things, though we'll certainly talk about them. But I want you to know that you need not reject those things to be a good Christian. So I'll be making that case throughout the course. And sort of more importantly, more generally, the case that God helps us make sense of the world. So this is kind of a running argument in the course that theism helps to explain the way that things are, sort of better than atheism or other alternatives. So, for example, we'll talk about fine-tuning, sort of the fact that the physical laws need to be a certain way for there to be life. We'll talk about morality, even just the existence of truth, and how those things are better supported by theism, at least in my view. So throughout the course, in making these arguments and thinking about these things, there's two things that I think we need to keep in mind. One is intellectual humility. We shouldn't pretend to know things that we don't actually know. So while we can boldly proclaim certain truths, we should stay humble about what we can and can't know. And kind of going along with that is intellectual generosity. So this generosity is sort of taking our opponent's arguments and making the best version of them. So we don't want to be arguing against sort of bad points that people are making. We want to address them at their strongest so that we're being fair to them. We're not sort of trying to make cheap shots. We would want them to do that to us. So in the same sense, we should extend that courtesy to them. So for example, if you were arguing with someone about euthanasia and you retorted, well, anyone who supports euthanasia wants to murder all old people. That's a horrible thing to do. You shouldn't want to murder old people. Therefore, euthanasia is wrong. That is a simplistic argument, and it's not being generous to your opponent. You're sort of assigning them positions that they probably don't actually hold. The typical euthanasia supporter does not want to murder old people. So keeping those things in mind and these two main takeaways hopefully will help to make this course coherent, and it will help to keep everything focused on sort of our Christian faith. Because ultimately, just at any class in Greenville, the point of a class, the point of your education here is to grow as a Christian, and your ability to express your faith and sort of bring that out into the world. Alright, so I've mentioned the term argument a couple times, and I want to be more specific about what that means, especially coming from a philosophy background. Arguments are important, and they're not when you're fighting with your parents or your roommate or whoever. It is sort of a way of presenting a case for a position. So at its basic level, an argument consists of two things. First is a list of premises, and second is a conclusion. So the list of premises are statements, and they will provide support for or guarantee the truth of the conclusion. So a very basic argument is Socrates is a man. all men are mortal. Therefore, these little 3 dots mean therefore. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. So we have premise 1, premise 2, and conclusion. And if you accept premise 1 and premise 2 is true, in this case, the conclusion is guaranteed to be true. So now that we have sort of a basic understanding of what an argument is, I'm going to talk about a few bad ways to make arguments that come up quite a bit. Alright, so we're going to talk now about some of these fallacious arguments, and the first one that I wanted to cover is a straw man argument. We've already seen one of these when I was talking about the euthanasia arguments. That was a straw man argument against euthanasia. So in general, a straw man argument is when you distort an opponent's position, defeat the distorted position, then claim victory for yourself. So the problem with the straw man argument is that you haven't actually defeated your opponent's argument. You've defeated your own distorted view of their argument. So you have defeated something, but it's not the real thing. Straw man gets its name because you're sort of constructing a straw man that's easier to knock over than a fully fleshed out argument, as it would be harder to knock over a real person rather than a straw man. So this sort of gets into the intellectual generosity. We don't want to construct straw men out of our opponents. We want to engage their real positions. In that way, we're being fair to them and we're actually engaging them. So the second fallacy I want to cover is this argument from ignorance. An argument from ignorance is stating that a lack of evidence is, in fact, evidence for your position. So, for example, if someone were to say, you can't prove that aliens haven't visited Earth, therefore aliens have visited Earth. They're saying that sort of you have a lack of evidence or a lack of proof to show that aliens haven't been here, therefore I can conclude that they have been. We want to avoid this because you're turning nothing into something. And as we'll see later, when we talk a little bit more about philosophy and metaphysics, the study of being, that turning nothing into something is problematic, both in the real world and in arguments, unless you are God. And we are not God, we will suppose, so we should avoid this type of argument. Now, this is our third fallacy, and I'm going to be contrasting it with an actual legitimate argument form. So the fallacy is this appeal to the people argument. And an appeal to the people goes, everyone thinks so, therefore it must be true. As you can see, this is a bad way of arguing. Lots of people, the majority of people, believe certain things that have turned out to be false. So we can't just take general opinion and say, therefore, general opinion is correct. However, you can have legitimate arguments from authority. So if someone is an authority in a particular field, Richard Dawkins, for example, is a biologist. If you're talking about something in biology and you cite Richard Dawkins, that can be a legitimate argument from authority. However, we need to be careful that people can only make arguments from authority in their given field. So Richard Dawkins, while maybe a good source in fields in biology, is not a theologian, is not a philosopher, so therefore we can't take his words as authoritative in those fields. So we need to avoid using just general opinion and saying that's true. We can trust authorities to an extent. Certainly it's not a knockdown argument. Authorities are wrong all the time, but it does lend some credence to an argument if an authority agrees with you. Again, however, an argument from authority only applies in that authority's field. So you can't take an economist and say that the economist knows something about sociology, for example. Alright, the last fallacy that I'm going to cover in this video is ad hominem, which is Latin for against the person. And an ad hominem occurs when you attack a person rather than their argument. So if someone is making a case and you say, well, they're a bad person, we shouldn't listen to them, you have sort of avoided their argument and then just attacked them. But in philosophy and theology, just in academia in general, we need to deal with a person's arguments, not them. So while we can attack a person's authority, we can perhaps say that they aren't qualified to say these sorts of things. That's relevant to the argument. We can't say they're a bad person, therefore we shouldn't listen to them. So this ad hominem also applies to the intellectual generosity. We can't be sort of saying, I don't like you, so I'm not going to listen to you. We need to try and take into account as much information, as many arguments as possible, and then work from there. So we should avoid this sort of personal attack strategy. Hopefully this has given you an overview of what we're going to be trying to do in this course. Now it's time to go to the syllabus and sort of see more specifically how the course will be graded, what exactly in terms of content we'll be covering. So go forth and happy reading.